My name is Carson Ellington, 40 years old, or rather just stepping into the age where people start looking back at their lives with a touch of wistfulness. For 17 years, I've dedicated myself to Orion Corporation, a titan in the energy technology industry where I began as a clumsy intern, flipping through thick stacks of documents in a small, stuffy room. Now I'm the head of strategy, a position not overly glamorous but one I take pride in. I've never been one for showiness, never. Major projects, moments when the company teetered on the edge of collapse, I quietly stepped in, fixed things, pulled it back from the brink, and then slipped away without fanfare. Colleagues call me the firefighter, but I just smile. For me, work isn't about fame, it's about responsibility. Orion isn't just a workplace. It's a second home where I've seen colleagues become like family, where I've pulled all-nighters for major contracts and shared joyful hugs when projects succeeded. I love this place. Love how it operates like a colossal machine, sometimes cumbersome, but always driven by passion. I've poured my youth into building it, brick by brick, relationship by relationship, but there's a secret I've always kept hidden, even from my closest friends at Orion. I am the son of Charles Ellington, chairman of Ellington Capital, a financial empire whose name alone commands respect. My father wanted me to take over the family business right after graduation, but I refused. I wanted to stand on my own, not in his shadow. I cut off all financial ties with my family and chose to live on my own salary. For 17 years, no one at Orion has known this. To them, I'm just Carson, the slightly reserved guy, always ready to lend a hand, and perhaps a bit odd for turning down invitations to the bar just to stay late at the office perfecting a report. I live in a modest apartment in the suburbs, not far from Orion's headquarters. Every morning I drive my old Toyota through tree-lined streets, listening to the radio play Christmas songs when winter rolls around. This December, the festive spirit has already started to creep in, but deep inside I have an uneasy feeling, something hard to pin down. Something's not right. I can sense it, the way you sense a storm coming from dark clouds on the horizon. Everything began to shift one late October morning when I walked into the meeting room on the 32nd floor. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Despite the bright sunlight streaming in from outside, I immediately noticed the averted glances from colleagues, the half-hearted handshakes. They were discussing the budget, but not with the usual lively debate. Something felt secretive, murky. I sat down trying to maintain a calm demeanor, but my mind was already cataloging small details. The CFO constantly checking his watch, the HR director scribbling notes at an unusual pace, and the absence of a few people from the legal department. The meeting ended with vague remarks about resource optimization. I knew that wasn't the whole story. On my way back to my office, I overheard a colleague mention, "Victor Hale, new CEO, arriving next week." Victor's name wasn't unfamiliar. He's a star in the consulting world, notorious for his ruthless cut and optimize strategies. I'd read about him in Forbes, a sharp, goal-driven man, but his victories often came at the cost of hundreds of layoffs and the shredding of core values. I returned to my desk and looked out the window. The city below buzzed with life, but a chill ran down my spine. On a Monday morning in early November, Victor Hale swept into Orion like a whirlwind. He strode into the headquarters, clad in an expensive gray suit, with a razor-sharp smile and eyes that seemed to pierce through everything. During the all-hands meeting, he stood at the podium, his voice as smooth as a seasoned actor's. "Orion needs change," he declared. "We're at a historic crossroads. We either move forward or get left behind." His words were grandiose, but I saw the truth beneath them. He wasn't here to build, he was here to dismantle. I sat in the back row, observing. Victor spoke of restructuring, optimization, and shareholder value. Not a single word about the people, the employees who had poured their sweat and passion into making Orion the titan it is today. I saw the anxious glances from colleagues. Sarah from R&D, who designed the groundbreaking battery system, and Tom, the chief engineer with 20 years of experience. They said nothing, but I knew they sensed the danger too. In the weeks that followed, Victor began to act. Closed-door meetings multiplied, often held late at night when only a few lights flickered in the headquarters. I wasn't invited, but I had my own ways of gathering information. A friend in the finance department revealed that Victor was requesting a list of high-cost personnel. My name was on it, along with dozens of others, veterans who had dedicated their careers to Orion. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation in the elevator. Two mid-level directors, now allies of Victor, were whispering about selling the company. A European conglomerate, one said. They want to buy Orion before Q2 next year. Victor's doing everything to inflate the stock price. I stood there, pretending to check my phone, but my heart was pounding. Sell Orion? The company that I and so many others had built? The thought cut like a knife. I started paying closer attention. Victor's decisions increasingly revealed his intentions. The R&D budget, the heart of Orion, was slashed heavily. Long-term projects, the ones that secured the company's future, were indefinitely postponed. Instead, Victor focused on short-term campaigns, cutting costs, boosting temporary profits, and laying off staff. I saw Sarah crying in the break room after her project was canceled. I saw Tom, the respected engineer, start taking his resume to interviews elsewhere. The atmosphere at Orion grew stifling, as if everyone was awaiting a verdict. I knew I couldn't sit idle. I'd spent my life protecting what I believed in, and Orion was a part of my very being. But what could I do? Stage a public revolt? That wasn't my style. I don't shy away from confrontation out of fear, but because I know there are more effective ways. I needed a plan not just to save myself, but to save my colleagues who were being pushed to the sidelines by Victor. One night, as the city glowed with Christmas lights, I sat alone in my apartment, a cold cup of coffee on the table. I opened my laptop and began documenting what I knew. The list of targeted personnel, the canceled projects, the rumors of a company sale. Then I called my father. That call wasn't easy. For 17 years, I'd never asked him for anything beyond advice. But this time, I needed more. "Carson," my father's voice came through the phone, steady and assured. "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" "Yes," I replied, my voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I won't let them destroy Orion. I need your help." He didn't ask further questions. He simply said, "Do what you think is right. Ellington Capital will back you." That night, I began to devise a plan. If Victor wanted to play a game of power, I'd show him I could play too. But not in the spotlight, from the shadows. I would buy up Orion's shares, enough to gain a voice, enough to turn the tables. And most importantly, I would ensure the rights of those who had dedicated and sacrificed their youth for Orion. December 22nd arrived, and the Christmas spirit was everywhere. Twinkling lights lined the streets, the jingle of bells played on the radio, and the faint smell of gingerbread cookies wafted from Orion's cafeteria. But in me, there was no trace of festivity. I had known this day was coming, from the subtle signs that had been flickering for the past 2 months. Still, when the moment actually arrived, it left me momentarily speechless. That morning, I went to the office as usual. My room on the 28th floor was unchanged, a desk cluttered with papers, a nearly spent ballpoint pen, and a photo of my strategy team from Orion's 10-year anniversary celebration. I looked at the photo, my heart heavy. Sarah, Tom, Lisa, familiar faces, people who had weathered countless storms with me. Today might be the last day I sat here. The internal phone rang at 10 in the morning. Victor's secretary, her voice cold, requested my presence in the CEO's office immediately. I stood up, adjusted my tie, and took a deep breath. On the way to the elevator, I looked out the window. The city below sparkled, but all I saw was a dull gray. I knew what awaited me. Victor's office was on the top floor, a vast space with glass walls overlooking the skyline. He sat behind a walnut desk, his gray suit as sharp as the first day I met him. But his smile, that smug, self-satisfied smile, made me want to clench my fist to hold back. "Carson," Victor said, his voice soft but cutting, as if reading from a script. "Thank you for your 17 years of dedication. It's truly appreciated. But the company needs to change. We have to move forward, and sometimes that means parting ways with people like you." I looked straight into his eyes, unblinking. Victor's words weren't unexpected, but they still felt like a knife twisting in my chest. 17 years, sleepless nights, saving projects from collapse, turning down opportunities elsewhere out of loyalty to Orion, all reduced to a hollow thank you. "So that's it," I replied, my voice strangely calm. "I understand." Victor raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised that I didn't protest or plead. He slid an envelope across the desk containing a termination notice and a laughably small severance package compared to what I had contributed. "We appreciate your professionalism," he said, but I knew he didn't care. To Victor, I was just a number in a cost report, an obstacle to be removed to score points with the board. I took the envelope, stood up, and left. As the office door closed behind me, I felt Victor's gaze as if he were waiting for me to crumble. But I didn't give him that satisfaction. I stepped into the elevator, watching the floor numbers tick downward. Each floor, each year I'd given to Orion played like a slow-motion film in my mind. I wasn't angry at Victor, not exactly. I just felt regret. Regret for Orion, regret for people like Sarah and Tom, who would soon receive envelopes like mine. When I returned to my office, colleagues were already looking at me with pity. News travels fast, as always. Lisa, my assistant, ran up to me, her eyes red. "Carson, this isn't fair. What did you do wrong?" I gave her a faint smile and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, Lisa. Everything will be fine." But in my heart, I knew things weren't over. In fact, they were just beginning. 2 months ago, when I first saw through Victor's scheme, I decided I wouldn't let myself become a victim. I had prepared. I had planned. And now, as I walked out of Orion with a cardboard box containing a few personal items, I didn't feel like a loser. I felt like a predator lying in wait, biding its time to strike. Snow began to fall as I left the building. Tiny flakes landed on my coat, melting into cold droplets. I paused, looking up at Orion's tower one last time that day. "Victor," I whispered to myself, "you just made a big mistake." I walked slowly down the street, reflecting on the past 2 months. When the first signs of trouble appeared, I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. I'm not the type to react impulsively, to jump into arguments or pound the table demanding justice. I prefer to prepare, calculate, and act when the time is right, and I knew that the right moment wouldn't come unless I created it myself. I understood that Victor was playing a high-stakes game. He wanted to turn Orion into an attractive commodity, inflating the stock price by cutting costs, laying off veteran employees, and then selling the company for a fortune. Short-term profits would make him a hero in the eyes of the board, but at the cost of Orion's future and the livelihoods of hundreds who had devoted their lives to it. I couldn't let that happen. But how do you fight a CEO backed by the board of directors? I had no internal power, no seat on the board. I was just a department head, albeit an experienced one. But I had something Victor would never suspect: the Ellington name and a connection to one of the largest investment funds in the country. I had secretly set up a shell company, Ellington Holdings, registered under the name of a trusted associate of my father's. No one at Orion, not even Victor, would connect it to me. My goal was to acquire enough shares to influence the shareholders' meeting, enough to derail Victor's plans and protect what I believed in. I targeted a venture capital fund looking to divest its Orion shares before the end of the year. They held 40% of the company's stock, a significant enough stake to shift the balance of power. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights. By day, I continued working at Orion, maintaining a calm facade, attending meetings and completing reports. But by night, I became someone else. I studied financial reports, analyzed stock prices, and worked with Ellington Capital's lawyers to ensure every transaction was discreet. I contacted the venture capital fund, negotiating through anonymous calls. They agreed to sell their 40% stake at a price I knew was reasonable, but with one condition: the buyer's identity would remain confidential until the shareholders' meeting on January 5th. Every move had to be meticulous. I knew Victor had eyes and ears everywhere. Once in the elevator, he looked at me with a probing stare. "Carson, you doing all right?" he asked, his tone laced with mockery. "I hear you've been quite busy." I just smiled and replied, "Same as always, Victor." But inside I knew he was suspicious. He wasn't foolish, but he had no idea I was playing a bigger game. And then the day of my termination arrived, just as I had anticipated. With a cardboard box in hand, I walked out of Orion, but I didn't feel like a loser. I held 40% of the company's shares, a weapon more powerful than any title. In the darkness of winter, I was waiting for the moment to flip on the light. The snow fell heavier in the final days of December. My small apartment, already modest, felt even colder. I sat by the window, watching snowflakes swirl under the streetlights, a cold cup of coffee on the table. Orion, where I had spent nearly half my life, now felt like a shadow. But I didn't let myself sink into regret. I had a plan, and this holiday season was my chance to perfect it. While the city was immersed in Christmas cheer, Victor Hale was busy polishing his image. On December 24th, I turned on the TV, and his face appeared on the business news. Standing in front of Orion's logo, his smug smile seemed etched into the screen. "Restructuring is the only path forward," he declared, his voice as slick as a politician's. "Orion is entering a new era, stronger, leaner." He spoke of shareholder value and profit optimization, but not once did he mention the people who had made Orion what it was. People like Sarah, Tom, or me. I turned off the TV, a surge of anger rising but quickly suppressed. Victor didn't know that every boastful word he uttered was just another brick paving the road to his own downfall. I opened my laptop and checked an email from my father. Ellington Holdings had officially completed the acquisition of 40% of Orion's shares. The lawyers had worked through the night to ensure every transaction was airtight, leaving no trace back to me. I smiled for the first time in days. "Keep gloating, Victor," I whispered. "On January 5th, you'll understand." During the holiday season, while others gathered with family, I worked relentlessly. I read every article, every interview Victor gave. He appeared on Bloomberg, Forbes, even a local magazine, each time with the same refrain. Orion was innovating, and he was the one leading the charge. But I saw what he was hiding. A Financial Times article mentioned the slashed R&D budget, putting Orion at risk of falling behind competitors in the energy sector. An anonymous source revealed that many veteran employees had left, taking their invaluable knowledge and experience with them. I saved every article, every interview clip like bullets waiting to be fired. I also spent time gathering evidence of Victor's missteps. Through old contacts at Orion, I learned he had pressured employees into signing unfavorable WRA contracts, denying them fair benefits upon termination. I also obtained a copy of an internal email where Victor demanded cuts to employee benefits, from health insurance to pensions, forcing many to seek jobs elsewhere. I reached out to a former colleague from the legal department who had been sacked just before me. He sent me a confidential document, a list of canceled strategic projects, including Sarah's battery technology, once hailed as Orion's future. Each piece of evidence was a fragment in the picture I was assembling. I didn't just want to topple Victor. I wanted to prove he was destroying Orion from within. I wanted the shareholders to see that what he called restructuring was in reality a massacre, and the cost would be the company's future. During those days, I also kept in touch with my laid-off colleagues. I called Sarah and invited her to a small cafe near my place. Under the dim lights, she looked weary, her eyes missing their former spark. "I don't know what to do anymore, Carson," she said, her voice trembling. "I trusted Orion, gave it everything. Now what? Start over at 40? I took her hand and promised things would change. "Just wait until January 5th, I said, "trust me." She looked at me, half doubting, half hopeful, but nodded. I also called Tom, who had found a new job but stayed in touch. "Carson, if you've got a plan, just tell me," he said over the phone, his voice resolute. "I'm ready to come back." even if it's just to fix what Victor's ruined. I smiled, feeling the bond with those who had built Orion alongside me. They weren't just colleagues, they were family. Each night I sat alone drafting my plan for the extraordinary shareholders meeting. I knew Victor would walk in brimming with confidence, thinking he had everything under control. But he didn't know I was waiting, with 40% of the shares in my hand and a long list of his mistakes. I didn't want revenge for personal reasons, I wanted justice, for Orion, for people like Sarah and Tom, and for myself. On Christmas Eve, as the world glowed with lights and laughter, I sat alone looking out the window. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the city. I sipped a glass of wine and raised it to the darkness. 10 more days, Victor, I whispered. Enjoy them because they're your last. On January 5th, I woke up while it was still dark. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a thin white layer on the streets. I put on a simple black suit, understated but enough to make me feel confident. Today was the day I'd been waiting for, the day I'd prepared for over the past 2 months. I looked at myself in the mirror, taking a deep breath. Today, Carson, I told myself. Today is the day justice speaks. The shareholders' meeting was held at a luxurious hotel in the city center. The grand hall was filled with rows of red velvet chairs and a brightly lit podium. I walked in, blending into the crowd of shareholders, executives, and senior staff. No one paid attention to me. To them, I was just a former employee, someone fired 3 weeks ago. But I didn't care. I wasn't here to be noticed. Not yet. Victor appeared right on time, like a star stepping onto a stage. He wore a sharp navy suit, his smile radiant, his confident gaze sweeping the room. He shook hands with a few major shareholders, exchanged polite pleasantries, and even paused to pose for a photo with a reporter. I stood in the corner watching. He thought he'd already won, that everything was in his grasp. But he didn't know I was holding the ace. As the meeting began, Victor took the podium, launching into a meticulously prepared speech. He spoke of his achievements, a 15% profit increase in the last quarter, a new peak in stock prices, and plans to sell Orion to a foreign conglomerate for billions. The room applauded, but I noticed the anxious glances of a few smaller shareholders. Those who had been with Orion since its early days. They knew, as I did, that the cost of this success was the sacrifice of hundreds of people in the company's future. Then the moment arrived. The secretary, a middle-aged woman with a crisp voice, stood up, adjusted her glasses, and read from her script. We now invite Mr. Carson Ellington to continue the presentation. I stepped out from the corner, walking slowly, each step echoing on the polished wooden floor. My eyes locked onto Victor's, unwavering. I didn't smile, but inside I was savoring every second of this moment. Murmurs began to ripple through the room like waves lapping at the shore. To most in the hall, I was just Carson Ellington, a veteran employee, a department head fired before Christmas. They thought I was here to deliver a farewell speech, perhaps an emotional tribute to my loyalty to Orion. They had no idea I was about to turn Victor's world upside down. As I reached the podium, Victor looked at me with disdain. He leaned toward the microphone, a smirk spreading across his face. Carson, he said, his mocking tone carrying through the hall. I didn't know you'd be here. Let me guess. You scraped together your meager salary to buy a few shares, didn't you? Playing the shareholder to feel like you still matter? A few chuckles came from the row of senior executives, Victor's ever-loyal sycophants. He looked at me, his eyes glinting with ridicule. Thanks for your loyalty, Carson, but this is a game for the big players. You should go home. Rest. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I simply nodded to the secretary, signaling her to continue. She adjusted her glasses again, her voice now sharp as a blade. Ellington Holdings, holding 40% of Orion's shares, represented by Mr. Carson Ellington, son of Charles Ellington, chairman of Ellington Capital. The room erupted after her introduction. The murmurs turned into a roaring wave, mouths agape, eyes wide with shock. Victor stood frozen on the podium, his face as pale as the snow outside. His hands, which had been gripping the edge of the podium, began to tremble. He looked at me, then at the secretary, then back at me, as if pleading for someone to say this was a joke. But no one spoke. Only the truth, cold and unrelenting, weighed heavily on his shoulders. "Hello, Victor," I said, my voice low but sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "It's been a while." I stepped forward, standing so close I could hear his quickened breaths. "You're right. This is a game for the big players, and I think it's time we played fair." Victor opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the air-conditioned chill of the hall. I saw his eyes flicker, his once arrogant confidence turning to panic. He knew he'd lost, but he didn't yet grasp the full extent. That was fine. I'd show him. I took the microphone and stepped to the center of the podium, forcing Victor to step back, like a defeated man pushed to the sidelines. The hall fell silent, every eye fixed on me. "Dear shareholders," I began, my voice low but resonant, each word like a hammer striking Victor's smugness. "I'm not here to talk about the numbers Victor has been boasting about. I'm here to talk about Orion, about the people who poured their sweat and passion into building it, about the values that made it what it is, and about the ruthless mistakes that are pushing it to the brink of collapse." I paused, staring directly at Victor. He lowered his head, trying to avoid my gaze, but I knew he was hearing every word. "Victor talks about profits, about stock prices, but he doesn't mention the real cost. He doesn't talk about the R&D projects that were cut, stripping Orion of its future. He doesn't mention the unfair confidentiality agreements that forced employees into vulnerable positions. And he certainly doesn't talk about people like Sarah, like Tom, like dozens of other veteran employees who were fired simply because their salaries were high, even though they are the heart of this company." The hall was silent, only the sound of breathing from those captivated by my words. I displayed a financial chart, its cold numbers exposing the truth. Mass layoffs brought no long-term benefits, only weakened Orion before its sale. I spoke of internal emails, secret decisions, and Victor's empty promises. Then, looking directly at him, I slowed my voice, making it sharper. "Victor, you thought you could destroy Orion and walk away with a shining reputation. But you were wrong. Today I'm here to take back what belongs to Orion and to the people who built it." I locked eyes with Victor, unwavering. He knew he was standing on the edge, but I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. Victor Hale wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his usual confidence. "Carson," he said, his voice higher than usual, trembling at the end. He turned to the audience, raising his hand as if to reclaim their attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please don't be swayed by this theatrics. Everything I've done, restructuring, cutting costs, boosting stock prices, was for Orion's benefit. We're stronger than ever. The stock price rose 15% last quarter, and foreign investors are ready to pay billions to buy Orion. This is success. This is the future." His voice tried to ring with confidence, but I could hear the desperation creeping in. His polished words no longer carried the same persuasive power, lacking the slickness of a star CEO. Each sentence was like a self-inflicted wound, revealing the panic beneath his arrogant facade. A few smaller shareholders shook their heads, whispering to each other. The executives who had once supported Victor now looked down, avoiding his gaze. Victor turned to me, his eyes flashing with anger. "And you, Carson? Who do you think you are? A fired employee who somehow bought some shares and thinks he can run the company? You don't understand what it takes to take Orion to new heights. My decisions were for the company's survival, for profits, for the shareholders." He pointed at me, his voice trembling, almost shouting. "You're just a bitter man seeking revenge for being fired." The hall buzzed again, but this time not because of Victor. They were waiting for me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I stood there, calm, letting his taunts pass like a fleeting breeze. I didn't need to shout or accuse. The truth, I knew, would speak for itself. "Victor," I said, my voice low and deliberate, each word like a stone hurled at his crumbling confidence. "You talk about profits, but you forget the cost. You slashed the R&D budget, killing projects like the battery technology that could have kept Orion at the forefront of the industry for decades. You forced employees into unfair WRA contracts, pushing them into vulnerable positions to cover your mistakes. You fired people like Tom, who gave 20 years to build Orion just because their salaries were a higher number on your report. A 15% profit. That's the price of selling the company's future, of selling the people who made it. I paused, letting my words sink into the room. A few shareholders nodded, their eyes lighting up with agreement. Victor opened his mouth to retort, but I raised my hand, signaling him to be silent. You talk about shareholders, Victor, but look around. I gestured to the rows of seats where the smaller shareholders, those who had invested in Orion from its early days, sat. They don't just want short-term profits. They want a sustainable Orion, one true to its values. You betrayed that, and today we're going to fix that mistake. I turned to the secretary, my voice firm. I propose a vote of no confidence in CEO Victor Hale, effective immediately. The hall erupted in whispers. Victor stood frozen, his face now a portrait of panic and humiliation. He tried to speak, his voice weak and lost in the noise. Ladies and gentlemen, please think carefully. I did everything for Orion. But no one was listening anymore. The shareholders began casting their votes, each ballot counted in tense silence. With 40% of the shares in my hands, plus the support of dozens of smaller shareholders, those who had watched Orion grow from its beginnings and refused to accept Victor's ruthlessness, the outcome was no surprise. The secretary stood, her voice ringing like a verdict. Victor Hale no longer has the confidence to serve as CEO of Orion. The decision is effective immediately. Applause broke out, but to me it was just background noise. I looked at Victor, now standing on the podium with a vacant stare. He was no longer the star CEO, no longer sporting his smug smile or smooth voice. He was just a defeated man, stripped of all his glory in front of hundreds. Victor slowly stepped down from the podium, his trembling hands clutching his briefcase. As he passed me, I heard his heavy breathing, as if each step was a humiliation. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word, only lowered his head and walked out of the hall. The door closed behind him, and I knew that was the end of Victor Hale at Orion. The hall was still buzzing after Victor's departure. Shareholders swarmed around me, asking about the next steps, about Orion's future. But I wasn't in a hurry. I had done what was necessary to topple Victor, but something more important lay ahead. Rebuilding Orion, restoring what truly belonged to it. I returned to the podium, taking the microphone once more. Dear shareholders, I said, my voice gentle but resolute, Orion is not just a company. It is the lifeblood of hundreds of people, the dream of those who dedicated their lives to building it. Today, we haven't just corrected a mistake. We've begun a new journey, a journey to restore values, restore trust, and restore people. I nominated Ellen Carter, Orion's veteran COO, as interim CEO. Ellen had been with the company for 20 years, a strong, dedicated woman who always put employees first. When I announced her name, the hall erupted in applause again. Ellen, seated in the front row, looked at me with a mix of surprise and gratitude. She stood, nodded, and I knew she would steer Orion in the right direction. I continued, my voice steady. Under Ellen's leadership, Orion will implement immediate changes. We commit to full year-end bonuses for all employees regardless of their position. We will increase benefits from health insurance to pensions and establish a union fund to support employees in tough times. Most importantly, we will offer reinstatement options to those unfairly laid off. People like Sarah, like Tom, and dozens of others who deserve to return to their home. The hall exploded in applause, this time not just from shareholders, but from the remaining senior staff. I saw Lisa, my assistant, her eyes sparkling from the corner of the room. I saw a few smaller shareholders wiping away tears, as if they had rediscovered their faith in Orion. And in my heart, a warmth spread. This wasn't my victory alone. It was the victory of everyone who believed in Orion. Snow fell gently, blanketing the city as I left the hotel after the shareholders' meeting. I stood on the sidewalk, my breath mingling with the cold air, watching people pass by under the lingering glow of Christmas lights. The next day, my phone lit up with notifications from news outlets. Victor Hale, once Orion's shining star, had become the centerpiece of failure. Orion CEO ousted in extraordinary shareholders' meeting, read a sharp headline on Bloomberg. The article detailed the shock in the hall when a former employee, me, revealed himself as the representative of Ellington Holdings, holding 40% of the shares and toppling Victor in front of hundreds. They called it one of the most dramatic turnarounds in the history of the energy technology industry. Another piece in the Financial Times was harsher. Victor Hale, once hailed as a restructuring genius, left Orion in disgrace, leaving behind a company on the brink of losing its core values. I scrolled through the articles, feeling not so much triumph but a deep sense of relief. Victor had paid the price, not because I sought revenge, but because he had chosen the wrong path. An image in the Wall Street Journal stopped me in my tracks. Victor, clutching a cardboard box, stepping out of Orion's headquarters under a snowy drizzle. His head was bowed, his shoulders slumped, with no trace of the arrogant CEO who once dominated headlines. The scene echoed the moment I left Orion 3 weeks earlier. But this time, the roles were reversed. Justice, as I had promised myself, had spoken at the right moment. In the weeks following the shareholders' meeting, Orion began appearing in positive headlines. Orion reboots under new leadership, recommitting to employees and innovation, a Forbes article wrote about Ellen Carter's appointment as interim CEO. They praised her as Orion's quiet hero, a leader who understood the company's values and was committed to reviving the slashed R&D projects. Another piece in TechCrunch highlighted the new humane policies. Full bonuses, increased benefits, and a program to reinstate laid-off employees. Orion is regaining trust from employees and smaller shareholders, the article noted, thanks to a strategy focused on people, not just profits. Sarah called me one morning, her voice trembling with emotion when she received the offer to return to work. "Carson, I don't know how you did it, but thank you," she said. Tom texted me promising to return to Orion as soon as he could. Those messages, more than any article, were my greatest reward. I didn't choose to become CEO, though some shareholders suggested it. Instead, I took on the role of chairman of the board, working behind the scenes to give Ellen and her team the space to shine. Orion didn't need a savior under the spotlight. It needed people who truly believed in its values, ready to rebuild from the ruins. As I stepped into my small apartment, the Christmas lights from a neighbor's house cast warm streaks across my walls. I sat down, opened my laptop, and read an email from my father. "You did it, Carson. I'm proud of you." I smiled for the first time in weeks, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I looked out the window where snow continued to fall. A monologue played in my mind. Sometimes retribution doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to let fairness speak at the right moment. Orion was back on track, not because I wanted to win, but because I believed in what it stood for. Loyalty, dedication, and faith in people. Victor was probably somewhere reading articles about his failure, facing the reality that blind ambition had cost him everything. As for me, I didn't need to prove anything more.